research assistants, and they coded for 6 months, and you'd get, 250 or something like that. All right, so now we got 750,000 in 15 minutes. The question is, how do you use it? I mean, how do we structure it so we can meaningfully analyze those data to answer the bigger questions that Max Weber and Marx and others are talking about? So one point here is, go beyond the names of the countries, go beyond the names of the regions, and try to find analytical variables like human capital, amenities or types of amenities, and then match together, at least posit potential if we have more citizens who are more highly educated in Guangdong, and they have more trade, and they've historically had more trade, and they maybe have more capital, higher budgets, and they have maybe more tourism. We haven't talked about that, but maybe tourists bring more information and more of a sense of comparison with tourism. So that is, we can then measure how much each of these variables may explain across 3,000 county districts in China. And the same thing in Poland, the same thing in France. And basically, we've been doing this now for over 30 years with people. And we now are working with people in 35 countries. It's called the Fiscal Austerity and Urban Innovation Project. And we published, what is it now? I think we published 50 books when the New Political Culture came out. So we're not counting anymore. We probably published 60 to 70 books, and this has in turn led to the Scenes Project. But basically, this is the background, which is the core ideas and the data. But a critical part of it is the people. That is, we learn from every conference, such as the exchange between the Dutch, the Poles, the Brits, the Americans, we're French, we're all there talking to each other. And we'll often not really know what the answer is. We'll often disagree. We'll sort of articulate what we've heard in our own surroundings. And then we say, well, we don't really know. Why don't we compare? Let's run this in Norway, in France, and Poland, and let's meet again in 3 months and see what we find. So we meet in 3 months. Oh, look, here's what I found. So then we learn. Okay, so it's been 50 books later. We learn more and more. Okay, so look at where there's variation. Let me now bring in link this to 2 readings in this section. First we talked about last time is Vildovsky. Okay, so Vildovsky was probably the most talented political scientist of his generation. He was a student of Robert Dahl. He was founder of the School of Public Policy at the University of California, Berkeley. He was professor of political science, and as I mentioned in the beginning, first half of his career, his theory was incrementalism. That government grows incrementally. And your question was, what if it grows incrementally? And the answer is, Vildovsky's answer was, that's the way all governments are most of the time. They just grow like that. No story, nothing fancy, etc. Then along came 1974. So this is after 68, but 74 in California. What happened in 1970? I got the date right? No, 78. What happened in 1978 in California? Who's in California? Nobody's in California? Okay. You all should know this wherever you're from, including China. Proposition 13, it was called. Yeah, Sophie, you're from California.
I lived there for like a year, but yeah.
Okay. Prop 13. Okay, why is this important? This completely changed Vildovsky's paradigm of how to do political science and of his very successful career. He was doing Hannah? Okay, Hannah.
Is this the tax reform?
Yes. Yeah. No, Prop 13, as I mentioned here briefly, It was a referendum. It's easy in California to initiate a referendum. You have something like 50,000 signatures, and you can put it on the ballot. And the ballot, the critical point is, it is then binding on the government to say, if you have 50% of the votes say do this, the government must do that. That does not happen in most of the world. You may have so-called referenda elsewhere, but they're serious in California and sometimes in Ohio school districts. Okay, so Prop 13 basically put on the ballot, we say we will cut property taxes by half on every home and a building in the state of California. And so everyone, Jerry Brown was the governor, the political parties, the civic groups, the League of Women Voters, everybody. And so they went around in Oakland, California, and they put up signs. If you vote on this Prop 13, this swimming pool will be closed, this library will be closed, or we will have to curtail services, etc. This hospital will have to reduce the people it gives shots to, and so forth. And what did the citizens of California do? 66% said yes, cut the taxes. Same thing happened 2 years later in Massachusetts. Same things happened in Michigan. And all roughly 2/3 voted the same way. Okay, it was the beginning of the taxpayers' revolt, so-called. From the bottom. Did they want less service? No, they didn't want. They wanted good services, but they also wanted less taxes. Can you do both of those? That's the beginning of the new political culture idea. That at least these leaders said, I will give you the same or better services, and I'll give you lower taxes, because we will increase productivity, because we figured out better ways of doing this than they've done in the past. Okay, so that obviously this is controversial. The traditional left and right say it's impossible, it's hypocrisy. But we've got examples, so we have a number of examples of all of the above. That is, cities differ. We find a lot of variation in terms of these kinds of things. Okay. So that's the title of this section. So I'm using Wildavsky as an example. Prop 13, he said, wow, my theory was wrong. This is not incremental change, this is revolution. And so the property taxes dropped. The schools suffered the most. That is, the schools have been the most hit. And so they've done a variety, but also the university. The university, the public transit, public transit a bit, but also the freeways. Freeway construction has dropped way off. Whereas the father of Jerry Brown was Pat Brown. Pat Brown built the University of California system. He built the California freeway system. And his son supervised, the opposite, cutting away back. But so, what did Wildavsky do to deal with this conception? It's a little bit in this paper, but I'm telling you more. And I've already told you a little bits about this along the way. Anybody remember any pieces you want to? He wrote a book. He wrote about 15 or more books, but one was called The History of Budgeting and Taxation in the Western World. So he started with the ancient Jews, the Bible, and he went up to present. He wrote it with an historian who knew more of the historical stuff, but he said, how did the political culture change? And did he talk in terms of the nation? That is, as he did this, this was one book he did. A second book he did with another woman who was a top, probably British anthropologist, was Mary Douglas. She worked on food and culinary style and so forth. And they wrote a book together called Risk and Culture. And with Mary Douglas, he developed an idea that there are 4 kinds of political cultures. And one is slavery, one is bureaucracy, one is market, and the other is sort of, I forgot what this is, but basically 4 types of strongly different political cultures. And these he basically used to reinterpret the whole history of the world for 2,000 years. And that is, instead of saying in 1850 this happened this way. He tried to say which moved more toward a market or away from a market, which moved, just a point one is the label. Point two was these styles fight against each other, that you have more market because the market is fighting against the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy in turn is fighting against slavery or authoritarian styles. So each of these four may exist in different, within. So when he wrote about the ancient Jews in the Bible, I mean, his main source for everybody was the Old and the New Testaments. But instead of saying so Max Weber wrote a book called Ancient Judaism. Wildavsky wrote 2 books on Moses alone while he was writing this other book, and to show clearly that the ancient Jews went through many, many changes of political culture inside Israel as they fought each other and as they changed as they were then invaded. Jerusalem was destroyed again and again. It was burned. They had ethnic cleansing. All that stuff was going on again. And so no nation, it went from slavery to bureaucracy to market to this and back and forth across individuals and so forth. Yes?
No, it's just
Okay. All right. So we can go into that more, but I'm giving you enough there to maybe encourage you to read and think about. And we've talked a bit about political culture in the last section and before that. Let me say just a word on sorry, no, just related to that. I got the words to this, which you all should know at least a word or two. That is, we contrast within the U.S. the regional differences, and I have here, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Let me see. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free while God is marching on. Okay, so the point is, this is very divinical, very religious, but it was used as a military marching song. It's used in churches today, and it was used to sort of rally a sense that we are morally right and we are fighting against the people who are wrong. So the point is where and how does a sense of we're right and just get infused? And that really is the idea of political culture, that each of these four say, if you want to build if you want to have equality after 1789 in France, we must abolish the aristocracy, we must abolish the uneven distributions, which the church and the nobility, the local nobles, have been stealing the money or using it for themselves. We must instead have the French Republic. And so the Republic, the bureaucracy, will evenly distribute services everywhere in France. Okay, so that today remains a substantial differentiated. And that is, France today is very different from Germany, from Italy, from England, from the U.S. And we will have here 3 lectures. I think it's Thursday, Friday, and Monday by one of the leading experts in France on this, whose name is, if you want to hear more elaboration, P.H. Menger. More of a German name, but French. Okay. He's talking in the French department, sociology department, and another group, sort of a mixed group, social science but look up his name if you want to hear him talk about it. One's on stratification of income. But I've seen one of the papers giving on Friday to the French. It's the French Studies Commission or Committee, whatever, of the university. One thing he shows that the French citizens today have a strong sense of the welfare state should make us equal, and they're anti-capitalist. That capitalism is destroying equality. So the French, and we ask questions of the Chinese today, I'm pretty sure, the Indians today, the Argentines, the Brazilians today, say, yes, we need more markets. You ask the French, oh, no, markets are terrible. So the French today, even though it's, a Western so-called market economy, the French citizens in the surveys, comparable items, you ask the Chinese and Indians and others, the French are some of the most anti-market people in the world. Very interesting. Rich, poor, etc. And so Menger talks about this. But where and how do these, and because in France right now, as you know, they elected a new president about the same time that Donald Trump was elected. And one of his biggest things is to increase the size of the market and weaken the state in controlling industry, because they've had massive unemployment, especially by immigrants, North Africans, Black Africans, are heavily unemployed. They're angry. They're not getting access to the French labor market, which is closed off. So the president basically is elected on the program of opening the French economy to immigrants and to young people who are not okay, so etc. So my point is simply that he's got survey data of French citizens on this. And part of it is this political culture in ways that very powerfully make France distinctive today. Okay, next reading linking to this is on one little town in the U.S. called Lawrence, Kansas. And Paul Shoemaker was a young political scientist a couple of years ago, and he took the idea of Robert Dahl that we talked about several times of issue specificity. That the politics differs depending on the issue. So you can have schools, or what were Dahl's 3 issues? And who governs? You should all remember this. What were Dahl's 3 issues and who governs? What were Dahl's 3 issues and who governs? What were Dahl's 3 issues and who governs? Dahl's 3 issues and who governs? Ah, okay. It's past the midterms, but it's not in your heads. Okay. All right. The specific answers are not important. What's important is the idea of issue areas. And the idea he illustrated with school board elections, mayoral elections, and the third was what? What we're talking about for Guangdong, economic growth. And the idea was the leaders in one may be different from leaders in another. And Dahl suggested, and then Paul Peterson built on this still further, substantially saying business may lead in urban development decisions. Because business leaders and developers, and this point has been elaborated by many social scientists, business and development should be most important in business and development decisions. Okay, so how about in Lawrence, Kansas? He got a list, not of 3, he made a list of about 30 or 40 different issue areas, all different kinds of things. Then he went out and he asked the citizens, what do you want? What do you favor the government doing about this issue, about libraries, about school crossing guards, about sewage protection, about sidewalk repair. I mean, lots of specific services, very specific areas. And then also the big issue of should we have more growth and development, or should we have about the same, or should we have less? And what did he find on the big bottom line question about this, just to give you the simple story first? What did the citizens, did the citizens of Lawrence, Kansas want to have more growth, the same, or less? These are not business leaders, these are average citizens, which is the creative point that Schumacher was pursuing. That is the theory from Peterson, the theory from Saskia Sassen. Now pointing out that these are theories from these people. The theory from Logan and Molich, the theory of Marx is developers and capitalists and business leaders want development. And the growth machine, so-called, of Harvey Molich is a way of pursuing this and building a coalition of politicals. And Clarence Stone, you know, many of the readings that we've done tell you this as if this is fact. Okay, so in Lawrence, Kansas, no. Most of the citizens wanted the same thing. It was not a capitalist leadership, whatever. The average citizens and the city council members and the mayor and the developers all said, yeah, we'd like to have Lawrence grow. Simple, but counterintuitive. Most of the literature was saying at the time, before he did the survey, said the opposite. The developers want growth because it builds capital and makes them richer, but this is imposing this on the poor citizens who don't want growth. Not true. The citizens wanted growth. Okay. Is Lawrence typical of the whole U.S.? We don't know, because citizen surveys are very expensive. We have very few. Most of the citizen surveys are national, because if you have 1,500 answers, you can analyze the national representative sample of American citizens. So 97% of the surveys you read are national samples like that. But if you want to know, is Lawrence different from Detroit, different from Ann Arbor, different from Irvine, California, the answer is we generally do not know, with the exception of Irvine. So I talked to somebody from Irvine recently. That is, Irvine had a center led by Mark Baldessari, and over a 15-year period, he did a survey of this representative sample of citizens in every city in the entire Orange County, all the council members and all the mayors. So Orange County is the best studied county in the whole U.S. and probably the world because of these surveys that were done, and they show dramatic changes in the policy preferences of the citizens over a 20, 30-year period. Women became far more important. Women's issues, equality. The mayor of Irvine that is, it's where you have John Wayne Airport. Okay, the mayor of Irvine, California, fought that, and he and a couple of hundred people, arm in arm, stood across the middle of the freeways at the middle of rush hour and stopped the traffic, saying, "No more freeways in Orange County. We want public transit." Okay, so that kind of thing was going on, and so more people. It reflected a change. That is, he was elected by citizens who wanted those policies. So even in places where you have a policy from the past, these can change. So you hear what you hear are theories, methods, and examples of where and how these things vary in ways that we can start with formulating X leads to Y leads to Z, but then we've got to be sensitive as to where and why it may change. And I'm simply saying, we don't just need to treat this as idiosyncratic, or there's no science, or every city is unique. On one level, every city is unique, but if we've got, as we have now in our files, we have over 10,000 cities in 35 countries. We go to meetings, we talk about this, we published over 50 books, and we learn a little bit more in each book, and in each MA, and each BA, as each person, so we see where and how these things work, and because we keep learning and it keeps changing, it's exciting, and that's that. And one, two, how do we get to be the most extensive study of local government in the world? Because we got more money and hired people to work with us? No. They got their own money. We started the project, so initially we were invited by NSF, and the NSF Sociology and Political Science Director said, once we start a national urban survey, like the like the general election study and the 40/50 census project, every 2 or 3 years we'll do a survey and we'll fund it on a continuing basis for decades. Fine. So 20 of us got together, we published a book, it was a proposal to NSF, and then government changed, and those two guys, and the NSF budget was cut 40%. So what did we do? Did we go home and quit? No. Eleanor Ostrom, who was the first woman and the first woman non-economist to win a Nobel Prize in economics, Eleanor made the suggestion, why don't we do it locally? How? Well, I'll volunteer to collect the data for Indiana, the cities of Indiana, if other people will volunteer for other states. So, I mean, we had people who were assistant professors with no money, said, oh yeah, I can do it over my summer vacation. And then I, in turn, will get all the data from 50 other states. So by breaking it up into 50 pieces, having 50 participants, sometimes people would do 2 or 3 adjacent states and so forth, getting a little bit of money from, for instance, we got money from the Institute of Governmental Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. We got money from the University of Virginia, etc. So we got some local or regional grants like that, but small. But the key was a collaboration among people who volunteered and who wanted to keep analyzing and making sense of this and meeting and getting bigger and better data than we ever had in the history of the whole urban area. Okay, so with that, basically, we've got some key points. I mean, I can fill in a lot more, but I've been talking almost nonstop. Why don't we have a little bit of discussion along these themes and see where you. That is where we're going to go in the next section. If you look at the readings, we've got contrasting types of cities and leadership patterns. That's our next big section for 2 weeks. And so we'll deal with some of the big famous examples, Chicago, New York, New Haven, and so forth. And we don't have as many as we would like internationally, but I try, I've sometimes, in several courses, not this time, we've often had a Chinese teaching assistant, and at the end of each class I would say, how would it be different in China? Okay, if we don't have a Chinese teaching assistant, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, Chinese participants, and several pretty, I mean, your English language is your main problem, but you've got lots of stuff in your heads, and we can draw on China and other people in the class, as well as the studies and the data which we have. But for now, discussion, questions, and reactions to any of this. And some of you are working on things like master's theses and trying to figure out, what am I going to do a master's thesis on? So, go ahead.
Just a general question, because as you mentioned, when we need to find variations, we need to do the comparisons. But actually, if we compare, compare 2 cities or several cities, that they have many aspects that's different. So how to control all the confounding factors and something?
This says B1, B2, 3 over to Bn.
So there are so many things there are different.
Edward Glaser, the world's leading urban economist, and his fellow that is the economists from about 1850 to 2000 said, we're not going to study happiness, that's too complicated. We talk about preferences and utility, but we're not going to study happiness because there are other fancy reasons. Since about 2000, maybe 1990, that's completely changed. The economists are studying happiness a lot. And Glaser has done a paper where he has, I think there are 150 independent variables of the causes of happiness. Happiness, okay. Music increases happiness for some people. All right. So he had measures. He had, in addition to income and education and occupation and age and race and so forth, he especially found that is the most important variables in the 150 as he pointed out, were not the classic economic variables. They were things like, are you married? Are you happily married? Do you have children? Are you in a church? That is, people who had more social connections tended to be happier. Not always. I mean, this is, again, most of this is social science. Most of the, you have put in 200 variables, and you usually explain about how much variance? 15%? Okay, so in general, 85% is still not explained. But the point is, if you get up to 15%, you're doing it, and it's not that there's anything wrong with social science. It's that people are complicated. You talk about the Chinese, but as you know, there are many kinds of Chinese. Yes?
A different topic, but going back to Shoemaker, so he says, at least in the part that we were assigned, he talks about some differences between bigger and smaller cities, but doesn't really define kind of where that cutoff is. And I was also wondering if he talks about ever a mechanism for what would cause those differences. For example, he talks about how utilitarianism kind of predominates in policymaking more so in smaller cities, and then justice kind of crops up in bigger cities. Does he ever put forth a mechanism for why that is?
Good question. This is predominant. This is mainly a case study of one town. Elsewhere, he and I and another guy at Kansas did a forgot what it's called. It's a setups manual, SETUPS. It's published by the American Political Science Association. And it was a comparative study with data which we made available, something like 200 variables, a little file to any person in a usually political science course. So students could analyze that themselves. So we had propositions in that little report, and that in turn built on the earlier things which you have read in this course, especially the book called Community Structure and Decision Making. And that book in chapter 5 has about 25 propositions of exactly the sort, or almost exactly the sort that you're talking about, as does the book called Scenescapes. So Scenescapes has the difference between Scenescapes and this is instead of studying cities, as in the earlier work, we go down to zip codes and individual citizens, and we include, and the other revolution is, since the time of that book, the whole field, including I, have added political culture. So in the 1960s, community power people said, I'm studying power. And they didn't know about culture. They didn't talk about culture at all. They didn't talk about religion. They didn't talk about, beliefs in a systematic way. Since then, we've added that. And so these are the 15 dimensions within Scenescapes include things that are closer to utilitarianism or moralism or equality or justice and so forth. That is, those kinds of values have become more articulated by and why has this happened? I would say the many things, but the simplest answer is citizens have gotten more important. As citizens have gotten more important, they have said, I want those political leaders to respond to my values as an average citizen. And if you get to equal 50%, women tend to be more moralistic around the world. That is, to talk more in terms of these ideals explicitly, and to say, so in that sense, and not to have a segregated kind of set of moral standards for people and families and young and old and political leaders. That is, the old view was, political leader, they're like gods. They can do whatever they want in their job. But this new idea is closer to the New England moralism. The New England moralism basically says we're all equal, and our values as a church, as a small town, as a community should also apply to, and so that in 1789 they said the king doesn't do that, we'll chop his head off. We want more egalitarianism. Okay. So values have come in more explicitly, and as have measures of those values, and so, yes, I mean, if you, and this is how the big data has changed modeling. That is, if you only got one case or 50 cases, you think in terms of 5 or 6 variables. If you've got 45,000 zip codes in the whole U.S., you can have 210 variables if you want. So you can control all sorts of stuff that you can with a smaller n. So thinking, the framing, the research design can change as we get better data in answering your questions. Okay. Onward. We'll see you Monday.